I'm Aurelia Sterling, 29 years old, and despite becoming one of the youngest tech executives in Silicon Valley, I've never been enough for my father. The annual Sterling family Christmas gathering was approaching, and this year felt different. Heavier somehow. I had just signed a deal that would make my startup worth 8 figures, and I'd bought my father a vintage Rolex he'd admired for years, hoping this time things would be different. In my purse was a document that would shatter everything he believed about our family. By the end of that snowy December evening, I would finally understand why Robert Sterling had spent my entire life treating me like a stranger in my own home. Before I share what happened that night, let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. Trust me, my story might help you understand that sometimes the truth is more freeing than the lies we live with. Growing up in an exclusive Connecticut suburb, the Sterling family was synonymous with success. My father, Robert Sterling, had built Sterling and Associates from a small law practice into one of the most prestigious corporate law firms on the East Coast. Everything in our world revolved around achievement, reputation, and maintaining the family legacy that stretched back 4 generations of lawyers and judges. From my earliest memories, my father was a towering figure of expectation and disappointment. While other fathers attended soccer games and school plays, Robert Sterling was reviewing briefs and taking depositions. When he did engage with us children, it was always through the lens of performance evaluation. Why wasn't I valedictorian when I graduated second in my class? Why did I choose computer science when the family tradition was law? Why couldn't I be more like my siblings who seemed to understand their roles in the Sterling dynasty? My mother, Catherine Sterling, was the perfect attorney's wife, elegant, well-educated, and completely subservient to my father's vision of family hierarchy. She'd attended Vassar, spoke 3 languages, and could host dinner parties that made business deals happen over dessert. But in my father's presence, she became almost invisible, her own opinions and desires secondary to maintaining the image he required. I watched her shrink herself to fit the space he allowed, never questioning his judgments about any of us children, even when they were clearly unfair. My older brother Michael was 5 years my senior and the undisputed crown prince of the Sterling Empire. He'd followed the prescribed path perfectly. Prep school, Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Law, then straight into the family firm where he excelled at corporate litigation. Everything came naturally to Michael, the social connections, the courtroom presence, the ability to make my father's face light up with pride. He was being groomed to take over the firm, and everyone, including me, accepted this as inevitable. My younger brother David, 3 years behind me, had found his own way to earn our father's approval through athletic excellence. Star quarterback in high school, full scholarship to Stanford, and now playing professional football. While not following the family legal tradition, his success was tangible and public enough to satisfy my father's need for reflected glory. David's achievements made headlines, brought prestige to the Sterling name, and provided my father with endless opportunities to casually mention his son, the professional athlete. Then there was me, the anomaly. I'd shown early aptitude for mathematics and technology, winning programming competitions in middle school and building my first app at 15. But these achievements meant nothing in a family that measured success by billable hours and courtroom victories. When I chose MIT over the Ivy League schools my father preferred, he treated it as a personal rejection. When I started my first tech company at 22 instead of going to law school, he stopped mentioning me in conversations about his children's accomplishments. The tech world embraced me in ways my family never had. By 25, I'd sold my first startup for enough money to buy a house in Palo Alto. By 27, I was CTO of a major software company. At 29, I'd founded Auratech, a name choice that felt like claiming my own identity, and just last month, we'd closed a Series C funding round that valued the company at $120 million. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built more wealth than my father's century-old law firm had ever generated, yet he still introduced me as his daughter, who plays with computers. The decision to buy him the 1963 Rolex Submariner came from that same desperate place that had driven every major decision in my life, the foolish hope that maybe this time, this gesture would be grand enough to earn his recognition. The watch had cost more than most people's cars, but I'd researched it carefully, knowing he'd admired this exact model at an auction last year. In my fantasy, presenting him with this gift would finally make him see that I'd succeeded on a scale that even impressed him. Looking back, I can see how pathetic that need was, how it had shaped every choice I'd made, every company I'd built, every deal I'd closed. I wasn't building technology for the love of innovation. I was building weapons in a war for my father's approval that I was destined to lose. The Sterling family Christmas gathering had been a tradition for over 30 years, always held at my parents' Georgian colonial estate in Greenwich. This year's guest list included the usual mix of family members, my father's law partners, a few judges, and several wealthy clients who had become family friends over the decades. The house would be decorated with understated elegance, no gaudy lights or inflatable decorations that might suggest anything less than sophisticated taste. As the date approached, my anxiety reached familiar heights. I spent weeks selecting the perfect outfit, something that would communicate success without appearing to try too hard. I settled on a charcoal gray designer dress with subtle jewelry, expensive but not flashy, professional but not masculine. The routine felt humiliating even as I participated in it, a successful CEO still dressing for my father's approval at 29 years old. Past Christmas gatherings haunted my preparation, each one marked by some form of paternal disappointment expertly delivered with surgical precision. When I'd won the National Programming Championship at 16, he'd questioned why I wasn't focusing on debate skills that would be useful in law. When I graduated summa cum laude from MIT, his only comment was that computer science was a field for people who couldn't handle the complexity of legal reasoning. My first million-dollar exit resulted in him wondering aloud whether tech success was just a bubble that would inevitably burst. And my promotion to CTO had prompted questions about whether Silicon Valley companies were just giving titles to young people to look innovative. But this year carried additional weight beyond the usual family dynamics. 3 months earlier, a casual decision to try one of those popular DNA testing services had revealed something impossible to ignore. The genetic markers indicated that Robert Sterling couldn't be my biological father. After weeks of denial and research, I'd quietly obtained a definitive paternity test using DNA samples from my father's toothbrush during a brief visit home. The results sat in my purse in a sealed envelope, confirming what seemed impossible. I wasn't genetically related to the man who had shaped my life through his systematic rejection. The discovery explained everything and nothing simultaneously. The lifelong feeling of being an outsider in my own family suddenly made scientific sense, but it also raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Did my father know? Had he always known? Was his coldness toward me the result of carrying this secret for 29 years? The possibilities swirled through my mind as I prepared for what might be our last family gathering as father and daughter. 2 days before Christmas, I drove to Greenwich in my Tesla, the Rolex gift carefully wrapped in the passenger seat. I'd timed my arrival for mid-afternoon, hoping to present the gift privately before other family members arrived. The familiar tree-lined driveway felt longer than usual, each turn bringing me closer to a confrontation I both dreaded and felt compelled to initiate. My father answered the door in his typical weekend attire, pressed khakis and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His expression showed mild irritation at the interruption, as if I were an unexpected salesperson rather than his daughter arriving for Christmas. "Aurelia, you're early," he said, checking his watch with the precision of a man who's scheduled affection. "The gathering isn't until tomorrow evening." "I know, Dad. I wanted to give you your Christmas gift privately," I explained, holding up the elegant box that contained the vintage Rolex. "It's something special, and I thought you'd appreciate receiving it without an audience." He accepted the gift with the polite detachment he reserved for obligatory social interactions, opening it with mechanical efficiency. When he saw the watch, his eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him in months. "This is quite expensive, Aurelia," he said, examining the timepiece with the analytical eye he applied to everything. "What are you trying to prove with such extravagance?" The question stung, but I'd expected it. "Nothing, Dad. I just closed a major funding round, and I wanted to celebrate by doing something nice for you." He studied the watch for several more minutes, testing the clasp, examining the face, making observations about the craftsmanship that felt more like a property appraisal than gratitude. "It's well made," he finally conceded. "Though I hope you're not developing spending habits that will compromise your financial stability. The tech industry is notoriously volatile." Even in accepting a gift worth more than many people's annual salary, he managed to insert doubt about my judgment and professional stability. The familiar pattern of praise followed immediately by criticism, the automatic assumption that my success was somehow fragile or undeserved. That evening, I called my best friend Emma from my hotel room, needing to process the cold reception with someone who understood the family dynamics I'd endured for decades. "He actually criticized your spending while accepting a Rolex that cost more than my car?" Emma asked with the righteous indignation of someone who'd witnessed too many similar interactions. "Aura, you need to stop trying to buy his approval. It's not for sale." I wanted to tell her about the DNA test, about the bombshell waiting in my purse, but something held me back. "I know you're right," I said instead. "I just keep thinking maybe this time will be different." "Promise me something," Emma said before we hung up. "Don't show him that test unless you're prepared for nuclear fallout. Some secrets are better left buried." I promised, but the envelope remained in my purse, its contents growing heavier with each passing hour. Christmas Eve arrived with picture-perfect snow falling outside the Sterling estate, creating the magazine-worthy scene my mother always orchestrated for family gatherings. I took the scenic route from my hotel, using the drive to rehearse responses to the inevitable questions about my personal life, my company's prospects, and my continued unmarried status at the ancient age of 29. The circular driveway was already crowded with luxury vehicles, BMWs, Mercedes, and a few Teslas belonging to the more progressive family friends. I noticed my father had prominently displayed the Rolex I'd given him, wearing it with a tailored navy blazer that suggested he wanted guests to notice his new accessory. The sight gave me a flutter of hope that maybe my gift had actually meant something to him. Mother greeted me at the front door with her characteristic warmth, the genuine affection she showed when my father wasn't within earshot to disapprove of emotional displays. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning," she whispered, embracing me tightly. "Your father is in the library with the Henderson group, discussing some case. You know how he gets when work and social events overlap." The grand foyer was already filled with the usual cast of characters, family members I saw once a year, my father's law partners with their perfectly groomed wives, and several judges who treated these gatherings as informal court sessions. My Aunt Margaret, mother's sister, immediately descended with their kisses and rapid-fire questions about why I wasn't dating anyone serious, while Uncle Charles offered hearty congratulations on my latest funding round that he'd read about in the Wall Street Journal. Michael arrived with his perfect wife Jennifer and their 2 children, receiving the warm paternal embrace I'd spent decades trying to earn. "Dad, love the new watch," Michael said, examining the Rolex with appreciation. "When did you decide to upgrade your collection?" I watched in familiar disbelief as my father clapped Michael on the shoulder and responded, "Sometimes success deserves recognition, son. When you've built something lasting, you can afford to celebrate appropriately." No mention of my gift, no acknowledgement of my contribution to his collection. David appeared before I could process this complete erasure of my gesture, pulling me into a genuine hug that reminded me why I'd always felt closer to my younger brother despite our different worlds. "Heard about your latest round," he said quietly. "9 figures? That's insane, Aura. Seriously impressive stuff." His validation felt like a balm, but the contrast with our father's dismissal only highlighted the painful disparity in treatment. Through the large windows, I could see my father leading a group of his colleagues toward his study, probably to show off other acquisitions while continuing to ignore the woman who just gifted him one of the most valuable items in his collection. As cocktails circulated and conversations flowed around topics of mutual funds and legal precedents, I found myself observing the family dynamics with the detached clarity that the DNA discovery had provided. The knowledge of my genetic otherness created an almost anthropological perspective on traditions I'd participated in my entire life, without truly belonging to them. The hour before dinner unfolded with predictable precision. Family members gravitated toward the formal living room with its museum-quality furniture and intimidating art collection selected more for investment potential than aesthetic pleasure. I positioned myself near the windows, slightly removed from the main conversation circles, nursing a glass of wine and watching the familiar hierarchy establish itself. Michael naturally commanded attention with stories of his latest courtroom victory, a complex corporate merger that had taken months to negotiate. The opposing counsel never saw our strategy coming, he explained with our father nodding approvingly from his leather chair. That's the Sterling approach. Always 3 moves ahead of the competition. That's what I've tried to instill in all my children, Father interjected proudly. Strategic thinking is in our blood. It's what separates the Sterling legacy from ordinary legal practices. The casual reference to blood and genetic inheritance felt like a physical blow given what I knew about my actual parentage. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me, the phantom weight of the envelope in my purse seeming to increase with each family-related claim he made. Aurelia, Judge Richardson called from across the room, Robert tells me you've had some success with your technology venture. Impressive for someone so young in such a competitive field. Before I could respond, my father cleared his throat with the practiced timing of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. It's encouraging to see Aurelia applying principles I taught her about business strategy, he said smoothly. Though the technology sector lacks the stability and substance of more traditional industries. When market conditions change, we'll see how well those paper valuations hold up. The familiar dismissal landed with practiced precision, acknowledging my success just enough to seem supportive while immediately undermining its significance and durability. The automatic pivot to questioning the foundation of my achievements, the implication that any success I'd gained was somehow derivative of his influence rather than my own capabilities. Actually, I began, summoning the confident voice I used in board meetings. Our company's valuation is based on recurring revenue models and scalable technology platforms. We've grown 400% year over year with 98% customer retention rates. The business fundamentals are quite solid. A brief silence followed as the gathered guests processed the impressive statistics before my father responded with a dismissive wave. Numbers can be manipulated to tell any story, Aurelia. Real success comes from building something that lasts generations, not chasing the latest trends. He turned toward Judge Richardson, effectively ending my contribution to the conversation. Speaking of lasting institutions, Harold, what's your take on the proposed changes to corporate bankruptcy law? I excused myself to refresh my drink, anger building toward the familiar breaking point that had defined every family gathering for the past decade. In the hallway, I encountered David returning from checking on his wife, who was managing their infant son in one of the upstairs rooms. Don't let him get to you, David whispered, squeezing my arm supportively. I heard about your company from a teammate whose brother works in tech. What you've built is revolutionary, Aura. Seriously groundbreaking stuff. His validation meant more than he probably realized, but it also highlighted how pathetic my continued need for family approval had become. A successful CEO still seeking validation from people who would never understand or appreciate what I'd accomplished. As I approached the bar setup in the dining room, I overheard my father's voice drifting from his adjoining study, the door slightly ajar as he spoke to someone on the phone. The watch? Yes. Quite an upgrade. When you work as hard as I have to build something from nothing, you earn these small luxuries. His voice carried the satisfied tone of someone enjoying a moment of pride. The voice responding belonged to someone I didn't recognize, presumably a business associate or client. Robert, that's a vintage submariner, isn't it? Those are incredibly rare. Where did you find such a perfect example? A brief pause followed before my father's response, each word carefully chosen to rewrite history in real time. I've been watching the auction market for years, waiting for the right piece. When you understand quality and have the patience to wait for excellence, opportunities present themselves. The casual erasure of my gift, the complete rewriting of how he'd acquired something I'd spent months researching and a fortune purchasing, sent a shock of clarity through me. This wasn't just about the watch. It was about a lifetime of having my contributions minimized, my achievements reframed as either lucky accidents or natural extensions of his influence. I retreated before being discovered, but the conversation continued in my mind as I rejoined the gathering. He'd completely erased my role in acquiring something he was clearly proud to own, just as he'd spent my entire life erasing my role in the family while benefiting from my achievements when it suited his narrative. The dinner bell chimed at exactly 7 o'clock, my mother's signal for the carefully choreographed migration to the formal dining room. I lingered behind, fingers brushing the outline of the envelope in my purse, weighing options and consequences that seemed increasingly inevitable. The Sterling formal dining room had always intimidated me with its imposing mahogany table that could seat 24 people, yet somehow felt coldly impersonal despite its grandeur. The oil paintings of deceased Sterling patriarchs watched from the walls like judicial observers, and the elaborate place settings prioritized formality over comfort, just like everything else in my father's carefully controlled world. Mother had outdone herself with the Christmas arrangements, crystal glasses catching light from the chandelier, evergreen centerpieces with subtle gold accents, placed cards in perfect calligraphy that assigned each guest their predetermined position in the social hierarchy. My card placed me strategically distant from meaningful conversation, seated between David's wife Sarah and one of my father's junior partners, safely removed from any opportunity to disrupt the evening's carefully planned dynamics. Michael and his family occupied the prime positions near my father at the head of the table, with David and his wife serving as buffers between the inner circle and extended family. Mother sat at the opposite end, her position perfectly illustrating her role, technically equal but separated by the expanse of polished wood, connected yet isolated. The first course arrived with military precision, seared duck breast with pomegranate reduction, plated identically and served simultaneously to all 22 guests. My father rose with wine glass in hand, commanding immediate silence without requiring a word, his presence alone sufficient to halt all conversation. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual Christmas gathering," he began with the polished charm he'd perfected over decades of courtroom advocacy. Each year, I'm reminded of how fortunate I am to have built not just a successful law practice, but a legacy embodied by my family and sustained by relationships with exceptional people like yourselves. His gaze swept proudly over Michael, who nodded with practiced humility, then David, who smiled warmly before sliding past me as if I occupied the same visual plane as the wallpaper. The familiar pattern of acknowledgement by omission, the subtle message that I remained outside the circle of recognized family achievements. "This year has brought particular reasons for celebration," he continued, raising his glass higher. Michael's partnership track at the firm continues to exceed expectations, with several landmark cases that have enhanced Sterling and Associates' reputation throughout New England. David's rookie season with the Patriots has brought national attention to the Sterling name in ways I never imagined when he was throwing footballs in our backyard. The toast continued with detailed praise for both brothers' accomplishments, specific achievements highlighted and connected to the broader Sterling legacy my father had spent decades building. As he spoke, I noticed him unconsciously adjusting the vintage Rolex on his wrist, the gesture drawing attention to his new acquisition while he carefully avoided mentioning its origin. "Family success comes from understanding your role in something larger than individual ambition," he concluded, his eyes finally landing on me with unmistakable meaning. "When we embrace proven pathways and honor tradition, we build something that lasts beyond any single generation." As the meal progressed through multiple courses, my father orchestrated conversation with subtle cues and direct questions, ensuring topics remained within his preferred domains of legal precedents, political connections, and occasional sports discussions that inevitably highlighted David's professional success. When Sarah attempted to mention my recent Forbes feature during a brief lull, my father smoothly intercepted. "Speaking of media coverage, Judge Morrison, what's your take on how the press is handling that Supreme Court case?" The redirection was so seamless that most guests didn't notice the deliberate erasure of my achievement, but I caught Mother's sympathetic glance across the table. By the third course, the familiar pattern had fully emerged. My father would periodically direct pointed questions in my direction, each designed to undermine rather than engage, to reframe any success as either limited in scope or somehow problematic. "Aurelia, Your company focuses primarily on software applications, correct? He asked during a brief pause in conversation about David's upcoming playoff game. Rather limiting, isn't it, given how quickly technology becomes obsolete? Or, I understand your latest funding came after significant market volatility. Fortunate timing, though I wonder about the sustainability of valuations in such an unpredictable sector. Each comment was carefully constructed to acknowledge my achievements, just enough to seem engaged while immediately questioning their foundation or durability. I maintained my professional demeanor, refusing to show the emotional reaction he seemed determined to provoke. Actually, Father, our platform is designed to be technology agnostic. I responded evenly. We've built adaptable systems that evolve with changing markets rather than becoming obsolete. It's one of the reasons our customer retention rates exceed industry standards. My corrections were delivered with practiced lightness, though I noticed David's supportive glances and Michael's satisfied smirks at each exchange. The familiar family dance, painful in its predictability, with each of us playing our assigned roles in a drama that had been running for 29 years. As the main course was served, prime rib with Yorkshire pudding that required ceremonial carving at the table, my father used the distraction to open another bottle of expensive wine. His consumption had steadily increased throughout the evening, a pattern I'd observed at previous gatherings that typically preceded his most cutting observations. Aurelia, Mrs. Henderson, one of my father's longtime clients, said with well-meaning interest as the carving concluded, "Such an accomplished young woman, and still single. The men in Silicon Valley must be intimidated by your success." Before I could formulate a diplomatic response about prioritizing career development, my father interjected with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for this opening. "Aurelia has always been more focused on proving something than building something," he said, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "Some people chase achievements to fill other voids in their lives. Building a family requires different priorities than she's demonstrated." The casual cruelty landed with surgical precision, implying my professional success was compensation for personal failure rather than an achievement worthy of respect. Mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even from her distant position, and several guests shifted uncomfortably at the unexpected personal attack. "Robert," Mother began with uncharacteristic firmness, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Perhaps if Aurelia had shown more interest in the young men I've introduced over the years, suitable prospects from good families, rather than dismissing them as incompatible with her lifestyle, she wouldn't be approaching 30 alone and focused solely on work." Each word was selected for maximum impact, the public dissection of my personal choices presented as paternal concern rather than the hostile critique it truly was. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes, the childhood urge to flee warring against adult determination to maintain dignity. I took a measured sip of water, noting with detached interest that my hand remained steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. "I appreciate your concern for my personal fulfillment, Father." I responded evenly, drawing on every negotiation technique I'd ever learned. "But as you've often emphasized, Sterling's focus on results, and my results speak for themselves." A tense silence fell over the table, relatives who had witnessed similar exchanges over the years studiously examining their plates while my father's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the architectural details of the coffered ceiling. The pressure in my chest expanded with each heartbeat, the culmination of a lifetime of these moments, these public humiliations disguised as family concern, these systematic erasures of my personhood and achievements. The envelope in my purse seemed to pulse with potential energy, a nuclear option I'd promised myself and Emma I wouldn't deploy. As the staff cleared dinner plates and prepared to serve dessert, I realized with perfect clarity that the current path was unsustainable, that continuing to seek approval from a man who was genetically programmed to withhold it was a form of self-destruction I could no longer afford. As coffee and dessert were being served, my father pushed his chair back slightly, a signal universally understood by the Sterling family as preparation for one of his traditional speeches, a custom that had evolved over years of Christmas gatherings. The anticipatory silence fell immediately, conversations halting mid-sentence, all attention reflexively turning toward the patriarch. My father stood, brandy snifter in hand, his expression taking on the authoritative gravitas he reserved for jury summations and family pronouncements. Before we retire to the living room for our traditional gift exchange, he began, voice carrying the commanding tone of someone accustomed to holding courtrooms, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on what the Sterling family represents. He gestured expansively, including his law partners and judicial friends as honorary members of this supposed dynasty. A family, like a law firm, requires vision, leadership, and members who understand their roles in maintaining institutional excellence. Success isn't accidental. It's cultivated through generations of wise decisions and strategic thinking. His gaze swept the table with practiced authority, appearing to make eye contact with everyone while actually connecting with no one in particular. As I look around this table, I'm reminded of the importance of bloodlines, of genetic inheritance that goes beyond mere wealth to encompass character, intelligence, and the instinctive understanding of how to build lasting legacies. The casual reference to bloodlines and genetic inheritance felt like a physical blow, given what I knew about my actual parentage. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me, the envelope in my purse containing evidence that would shatter his entire premise about Sterling family genetics. I'm proud to see my children embracing the values I've worked to instill, he continued, turning toward Michael with unmistakable favoritism. Michael, your work at the firm demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking that distinguishes Sterling attorneys from mere practitioners. You haven't just met expectations, you've elevated them, proving that excellence truly runs in our blood. Michael nodded with satisfaction barely concealed behind professional humility, the golden child receiving his expected recognition. My father then shifted toward David, his expression warming further. And David, while your path diverged from family tradition, your success on the football field shows the same competitive drive and strategic intelligence that characterizes Sterling achievements. You've brought national recognition to our family name while demonstrating that excellence manifests differently but stems from the same genetic foundation. David's smile was genuine but slightly uncomfortable, always more gracious about receiving praise than demanding it. The spotlight had never been his primary motivation, unlike Michael, who seemed to feed on paternal approval. I braced myself for what would inevitably come next, the careful omission, the pointed silence where my name should be mentioned, the practiced technique of praise by exclusion that would communicate volumes without requiring explicit criticism. What happened instead was somehow worse than being ignored entirely. My father's gaze finally landed on me, the slight narrowing of his eyes betraying the calculated nature of what would follow. As I reflect on the importance of genetic inheritance and family legacy, he continued, voice modulating to what others might mistake for thoughtfulness rather than the prelude to devastation it actually signaled, I'm reminded that not everyone at this table shares the fundamental qualities that define Sterling's success. He took a deliberate sip of brandy, the theatrical pause allowing tension to build while guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the direction of his remarks without understanding their target. Success runs in our blood, he announced, raising his glass higher. But apparently not in yours, Aurelia. The words landed with nuclear precision, followed by a beat of shocked silence before nervous laughter rippled through some guests who assumed this must be some form of harsh family humor rather than the public execution it actually was. I felt blood rush to my face then drain away completely, leaving a cold numbness as every eye at the table turned toward me with expressions ranging from embarrassment to pity to morbid fascination. My father continued as if he'd made a casual observation about the weather. Some people spend their entire lives trying to prove they belong in a family, chasing achievements that look impressive on paper but lack the substance that comes from true genetic inheritance. Real success isn't about individual accomplishments. It's about understanding your place in something larger than yourself. The deliberate vagueness of some people fooled no one present. The target of his remarks was crystalline in its clarity, the public humiliation designed to establish definitively that I remained outside the circle of legitimate family recognition despite any external success I might achieve. Mother's face had gone completely white, her hands trembling around her napkin, while Michael looked smugly vindicated and David appeared genuinely mortified. Several cousins and family friends stared at their plates in embarrassment, while my father's law partners exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. For 30 seconds that stretched like hours, I remained frozen, experiencing the physical sensations of humiliation with clinical detachment. The burning face, the constricted throat, the accelerated heartbeat, the fight-or-flight response flooding my system with adrenaline that demanded action. A lifetime of similar moments flashed through my consciousness, a rapid slideshow of public corrections, subtle undermining, achievements reframed as inadequacies, each building upon the last to create the cumulative message that I was fundamentally insufficient, unworthy of the name I carried, the name that genetic science had recently confirmed wasn't actually mine to claim. As my father concluded his speech with platitudes about family unity that rang hollow after his pointed exclusion, something shifted irrevocably within me. A final thread severing between the desperate child seeking approval and the adult woman who suddenly saw with perfect clarity the futility of that lifelong quest. The weight of the envelope in my purse transformed from burden to liberation, its contents no longer a shameful secret, but a key unlocking the prison of false expectations I'd occupied my entire life. The room remained suspended in uncomfortable tension, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or a hasty exit, as had happened in previous years when his criticism had driven me to emotional retreat. Instead, I felt a strange calm descend, a clarity of purpose crystallizing around the decision that had perhaps been inevitable from the moment the test results arrived. Without fully planning the action, I found myself standing, the movement so smooth and deliberate that it commanded immediate attention. Conversations halted mid-sentence, as all eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, the latter primarily from family members who had witnessed previous Sterling family confrontations. My wine glass remained on the table, deliberately not raised, the symbolism of my refusal to participate in his toast unmistakable to everyone present. I smoothed my dress with steady hands, surprising myself with the absolute calm that had replaced the earlier turmoil, as if I'd passed through a storm into its peaceful eye. "Thank you, Father, for that illuminating speech," I began, my voice carrying clearly without effort, the professional tone I'd perfected in hostile board meetings serving me well in this unexpected moment. "You're absolutely right about success running in blood. I've spent 29 years wondering why I never seemed to inherit the Sterling genetic advantages you've described so eloquently tonight." The room had gone completely still, the kind of weighted silence that precedes seismic shifts. Mother's face showed pure alarm while my father's expression darkened with recognition that this script wasn't following his expected pattern. For the record, I continued with deliberate lightness that belied the magnitude of what was coming. "I've built a company valued at over $100 million, employed 300 people, and revolutionized how financial institutions process digital transactions. By most objective measures, hardly evidence of genetic deficiency." I allowed my gaze to sweep the table, making brief eye contact with several relatives who nodded slightly in acknowledgement before returning my attention to my father. "But you're correct that success runs in families, Father. It's fascinating how genetics work, isn't it? How certain traits are passed down through bloodlines, how DNA determines so much about who we become and what we're capable of achieving." I reached for my purse with deliberate calm, aware that every movement was being closely observed, the unusual spectacle of the compliant daughter finally breaking rank too compelling to ignore. "I bought you that Rolex," I said directly to my father, whose face had settled into the cold mask he wore when negotiations weren't proceeding to his advantage, "not because you needed it or deserved it, but because I still harbored the childish hope that some gesture might finally bridge whatever mysterious gap has existed between us my entire life." From my purse, I withdrew the envelope containing the paternity test results, the paper seeming almost mundane considering the explosive information it contained. "For 29 years, I've blamed myself for your inability to show me the affection you give Michael and David so freely. I've contorted myself into impossible shapes trying to become whatever might finally earn your approval, never understanding that the problem wasn't my actions, it was my DNA. A collective intake of breath circled the table as the implications of my words registered. Mother's remaining color drained completely while Michael straightened with sudden alertness, David's face showing genuine concern. I placed the envelope precisely in the center of the table, my movements measured and deliberate. "Merry Christmas, Father," I said with quiet finality, infusing the paternal title with all the irony the moment deserved. "Now you can stop pretending genetics determine worth, because according to science, I don't carry your blood at all." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked from the dining room, back straight, pace unhurried, preserving the dignity that had been systematically stripped from me throughout the evening. The shocked silence held until I reached the foyer, followed by the immediate eruption of multiple conversations, questions overlapping into unintelligible chaos. I continued outside without hesitation, the December air sharp against my flushed skin, the walkway illuminated by elegant landscape lighting that created pools of warmth in the winter darkness. My Tesla sat where I'd parked it hours earlier, the sleek lines reflecting the house lights, a symbol of everything I'd achieved without family support or approval. The decision crystallized as I approached my "try this" response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. Hit continue to nudge Claude along to continue. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The decision crystallized as I approached my car. I wouldn't be returning to that house, wouldn't be participating in the traditional gift exchange that followed dinner, wouldn't be subjecting myself to whatever emotional aftermath awaited inside. The clean break felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 29 years. My phone began buzzing before I'd even started the engine, David's name appearing on the screen, followed immediately by a text from my mother. I silenced the device without reading the messages, needing this moment of clarity to remain undisturbed by guilt or second-guessing. The drive back to my hotel passed in a strange state of heightened awareness. The familiar Connecticut landscape looked different somehow, as if removing the burden of family obligation had adjusted my perception of everything else. The weight that had pressed on my chest throughout dinner was gone, replaced by something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace. At the hotel, I finally read the accumulating messages. David's texts were concerned but supportive. "Are you okay? That was incredible. Call me when you're ready." Mother's were more urgent. "Aurelia, please come back. We need to talk about this privately." Michael's single message was predictably self-centered. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to this family?" My father had not contacted me at all. I ordered room service and settled into the oversized hotel chair, laptop open, doing what I always did when life became overwhelming. I worked. But for the first time in years, the work felt purely mine, untainted by the desperate need to prove something to someone who would never acknowledge it anyway. Around midnight, my phone rang. Mother's name appeared, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Aurelia." Her voice was strained, exhausted. "Your father locked himself in his study after you left. He won't speak to anyone." "I'm sorry this happened at Christmas," I said and meant it. "But I'm not sorry I finally told the truth." A long pause stretched between us before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've known since you were 6 months old." The confession hit like a physical blow. "What?" "The family doctor noticed some inconsistencies during a routine checkup. Your father demanded a test. When the results came back..." She trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy between us. "You've both known for 28 years? The magnitude of the deception was staggering. And you let him treat me like that anyway. I thought if we never acknowledged it, if we just raised you as our own, it wouldn't matter," she said, tears evident in her voice. "But your father, he couldn't get past it. He tried, but every achievement of yours reminded him that you weren't truly his." "Whose am I?" The question I'd been afraid to ask. Another pause, longer this time. "Do you remember your godfather, Thomas Mitchell? He was your father's law partner before he died in that car accident when you were 2. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Thomas Mitchell, the brilliant lawyer who'd helped build Sterling and Associates before his tragic death. The man whose legal philosophy my father still quoted, whose innovative strategies had shaped the firm's reputation. the founding partner whose memory was revered but whose personal life had been carefully omitted from family stories. He was married, Mother continued softly, but his wife couldn't have children. The affair was brief, a moment of weakness during a difficult time in both our marriages. When Thomas died, your father felt obligated to raise you as his own rather than destroy both families with the truth. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent my entire life feeling inadequate compared to the Sterling genetic legacy, when in reality I carried the DNA of the man whose legal brilliance had built half the foundation my father stood on. The intellect he dismissed as somehow deficient was actually inherited from his most respected colleague and friend. "Does this change anything?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your father is a proud man," she said quietly. "Proud and stubborn, and incapable of admitting when he's wrong. He convinced himself that his coldness was protecting the family, that acknowledging you would somehow diminish Michael and David's legitimacy." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, 29 years of unspoken truths finally emerging. She told me about Thomas Mitchell's brilliance, his innovative legal mind, his gentle humor that I'd apparently inherited along with his analytical abilities. She told me about her guilt, her regret, her own complicity in a deception that had damaged everyone it was meant to protect. When we finally hung up, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than before. The mystery of my parentage was solved, but the emotional damage couldn't be erased by genetic explanations. 6 months later, the Forbes article came out on a Tuesday in June. Tech visionary Aurelia Sterling disrupts financial services industry featured a full-page photo of me in my Palo Alto office, surrounded by monitors displaying our latest platform innovations. The article detailed Aureteca's growth, our revolutionary approach to digital banking security, and my vision for the future of financial technology. I was quoted extensively about leadership, innovation, and the importance of creating inclusive workplace cultures where talent thrives regardless of background. The journalist had been particularly interested in my philosophy of genetic diversity in team building, though she hadn't understood the personal significance of that phrase. David called within an hour of the article going live. "Have you seen Dad's LinkedIn?" he asked without preamble. I pulled up Robert Sterling's profile to find a post shared just minutes after the Forbes article was published. "Proud father moment. My daughter Aurelia Sterling featured in Forbes for her groundbreaking work in financial technology. The Sterling tradition of excellence continues in unexpected forms. #ProudDad, #TechInnovation, #FamilyLegacy. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 months of complete silence, no acknowledgement of the Christmas dinner revelation, no response to my attempts at communication through Mother, and now a public claim of paternal pride the moment my success reached a level that reflected positively on the Sterling name. He's getting hundreds of congratulations," David continued. "Colleagues, clients, judges, everyone's commenting about how proud he must be of his accomplished daughter." I stared at the post, scrolling through the effusive responses, the backslapping congratulations, the reinforcement of a narrative that bore no resemblance to our actual relationship. He'd seamlessly incorporated my achievement into his personal brand without addressing any of the underlying issues his behavior had created. "Are you going to respond?" David asked. I considered it. The professional response would be to ignore the post, to maintain the family fiction for the sake of business relationships and social harmony. The personal response would be to expose the hypocrisy publicly, to reveal the true nature of our relationship to his professional network. Instead, I chose a third option. I created my own LinkedIn post, featuring the same Forbes article with a different perspective, grateful for this Forbes recognition of Aureteca's work. Success comes from surrounding yourself with people who believe in your potential, not from those who share your DNA. To my incredible team, my investors, my mentors, and my chosen family, thank you for seeing possibilities where others saw limitations. #ChoosingFamily, #TechLeadership, #GratefulCEO. The post went viral within hours, generating thousands of reactions and comments from entrepreneurs, tech leaders, and professionals who resonated with the message about chosen family and believing in potential. The contrast with my father's claim of genetic pride was stark enough that several industry publications picked up both posts as examples of different generational approaches to success and family. My father never contacted me about either post. 1 year later, the acquisition offer came from Goldman Sachs on a cold February morning, a figure that would make Aurelia one of the largest tech exits of the year. As I reviewed the term sheet with my legal team, I realized I'd finally achieved something that even Robert Sterling's exacting standards couldn't dismiss. I'd built a company valuable enough to interest the most prestigious financial institutions in the world. The negotiation process took 3 months, during which I was featured on the cover of TechCrunch, interviewed by CNN about the future of financial technology, and invited to speak at major industry conferences around the world. My success had reached a level where it existed independently of family approval or disapproval. The closing dinner was held at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, attended by Goldman Sachs executives, my board members, key employees, and the legal teams that had structured the deal. As champagne flowed and congratulations circled the table, I felt the profound satisfaction of an achievement that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your success. I would have been proud to call you my daughter. A friend of Thomas Mitchell." The message came from one of Thomas Mitchell's former colleagues, a retired judge who'd apparently followed my career with interest. It was the first acknowledgement I'd ever received of my biological father's legacy, and it meant more than the 9-figure acquisition check sitting in my purse. That night, alone in my Manhattan hotel room, I finally allowed myself to grieve, not for the father who'd rejected me, but for the man I'd never known, whose brilliance I'd inherited along with his innovative spirit. Thomas Mitchell had been dead for 27 years, but his intellectual DNA lived on in every algorithm I'd written, every company I'd built, every impossible problem I'd solved through pure analytical thinking. The letter. 3 weeks after the acquisition closed, a handwritten letter arrived at my Palo Alto office. The return address was familiar, the Sterling family estate in Greenwich. The handwriting belonged to my father. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it, wondering if this would be an attempt at reconciliation, a legal document, or something else entirely. "Aurelia, I've spent the past year trying to write this letter, beginning and discarding dozens of drafts that never captured what I needed to say. Your success with Aurelia represents achievements that surpass anything I accomplished in my legal career. You built something revolutionary from nothing, created value that will impact millions of people, and demonstrated leadership that my generation of lawyers never imagined possible. I was wrong about you. Wrong about what constitutes meaningful success, wrong about the importance of bloodlines, wrong about what makes a family. Most importantly, I was wrong to let my pride prevent me from acknowledging your remarkable capabilities. You are not my biological daughter, but you are Thomas Mitchell's child, and Thomas was the most brilliant legal mind I ever encountered. His innovative thinking, his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems, his gift for strategic analysis, all of that lives in you, enhanced by talents he never possessed. I cannot undo 29 years of treating you as less than you deserved. I cannot reclaim the relationship we might have had if I had been a better man. But I can acknowledge, finally and completely, that you succeeded not despite your parentage, but because of it. You inherited the best qualities of a man I respected above all others, and you've built upon that foundation in ways that would have made Thomas proud beyond measure. I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I needed you to know that your achievements are recognized, your capabilities are acknowledged, and your success is entirely your own. Respectfully, Robert Sterling. I read the letter 3 times, emotions cycling through anger, sadness, and something approaching closure. It was too little, too late, but it was also the first honest communication I'd ever received from the man who'd raised me. I never responded to the letter. 5 years later, the real ending. The Stanford graduation ceremony took place on a perfect California morning, with families gathered on the quad to celebrate their children's achievements. I sat in the audience, wearing my honorary doctorate robes, having been invited to deliver the commencement address to the computer science graduates. My speech focused on innovation, resilience, and the importance of defining success for yourself rather than accepting others' definitions. I talked about building companies that solve real problems, about creating inclusive cultures where diverse perspectives drive breakthrough thinking, and about the courage required to pursue your vision even when others can't see its potential. What I didn't mention was the journey that had brought me to this moment, the years of seeking approval from people incapable of giving it, the revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew about family, the discovery that my real legacy came not from the Sterling name, but from the brilliant mind of Thomas Mitchell. After the ceremony, as I chatted with graduates and their families, a young woman approached with her parents. "Professor Sterling," she said excitedly, "I've followed your career since I was in high school. Your story inspired me to major in computer science despite my family's objections." She introduced her parents, immigrants who'd initially wanted their daughter to pursue more traditional careers but had come to understand the value of following one's passion. As I watched their proud faces, I realized I'd finally found what I'd been seeking my entire life. Not approval from people who shared my DNA, but recognition from those who shared my values. The young woman's father shook my hand warmly. "Thank you for showing our daughter that success comes from believing in yourself, not from having the right family name." I smiled, thinking of Thomas Mitchell, whose innovative legal mind lived on in my work, and of Robert Sterling, whose inability to love me had ultimately freed me to love myself. "The right family," I told him, "is the one that believes in your potential, not the one you're born into." That evening, I had dinner with Emma, David, and his growing family at a restaurant overlooking the bay. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing with the ease of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. These were my people, chosen family bound by affection and mutual respect rather than genetics and obligation. My phone remained silent throughout the meal. Robert Sterling had never called, never visited, never attempted to bridge the gap his pride had created. Mother sent occasional updates. He was well, the firm was thriving, he'd developed a heart condition that made him more reflective about family relationships. But some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, David's 5-year-old daughter tugged on my sleeve. "Aunt Aurelia," she said with the serious expression children wear when sharing important thoughts, "are you going to have kids someday?" I knelt down to her level, considering the question that had haunted family gatherings for years. "Maybe someday," I said honestly. "But even if I don't, I'll always have you and your brothers." Family isn't just about having children, it's about loving people and having them love you back. She nodded solemnly, satisfied with this explanation, before running back to her parents. Later that night, alone in my Palo Alto home, I sat in my study surrounded by awards, patents, and photos from various tech conferences. The Stanford honorary doctorate sat on my desk next to a framed copy of the Forbes article that had started this chapter of my life. I thought about success, about legacy, about the different ways we measure a life well lived. Robert Sterling had built a law firm that would bear his name for generations, but he'd sacrificed genuine relationships in pursuit of professional legacy. I'd built companies that would outlast me, but more importantly, I'd built a chosen family that celebrated my achievements and supported my dreams. The Sterling name would continue through Michael's children, carrying forward whatever genetic legacy mattered to my father. But the Mitchell legacy, the innovative thinking, the problem-solving brilliance, the courage to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles, that lived on in every line of code I wrote, every company I built, every impossible problem I solved. I picked up my laptop and began outlining my next venture, a fintech startup focused on increasing access to capital for underrepresented entrepreneurs. The work energized me in ways that family approval never could, feeding a passion that was entirely my own. Outside my study window, the lights of Silicon Valley stretched toward the horizon, each one representing someone's dream, someone's innovation, someone's refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. This was my community, my chosen family, my real legacy. I had spent 29 years seeking approval from a man who was genetically programmed to withhold it. I had wasted decades trying to prove my worth to people who measured value by bloodlines rather than achievements. But I had also inherited the brilliant mind of Thomas Mitchell, a man whose innovative thinking had shaped an entire law firm and whose intellectual DNA lived on in everything I created. I had built a chosen family of people who celebrated my successes without qualification, who supported my dreams without reservation, who loved me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Most importantly, I had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all. The opinion that matters most is your own. The Sterling name had never truly belonged to me anyway. I was Aurelia Mitchell, daughter of a brilliant legal mind, creator of revolutionary technology, and architect of my own extraordinary life.
And that was enough.
It was more than enough. It was everything. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, if you've ever questioned whether you belong where you were raised, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by the people who can't see it. Sometimes the greatest gift is discovering that the approval you've been seeking was never worth having in the first place. Your chosen family, the people who celebrate your victories, support your dreams, and love you unconditionally, they're your real legacy. And that's a legacy worth building.